We all know Nate, the platoon leader of Courage and Distinction, profiled by Evan Wright in Rolling Stone and then A Generation Kill. We know Nate, the New York Times bestselling author of One Bullet Away, hailed by the Military Times as one of the 10 best military books of the decade. We know Nate, the CEO of Center for New American Security, a leading Washington, D.C. think tank. We know Nate, the CEO of Endgame, who led that organization through to its acquisition by Elastic. And we certainly all know Ambassador Fick, the first ever United States ambassador for cyberspace and digital policy. Thank you for continuing your long career of service on behalf of all of us, and most of all, thank you for your friendship. And with that, Mike, I'll leave it to you.
But having gone to war now, were you starting to realize that the art of warfare was changing substantially, history was changing substantially?
Yep.
Did you have a sense of how fast everything was changing now?
I had some early inklings. So we had a couple of really good people on our team who left, and one went to go do all Asia Pacific work, and another left to go do all technology work. And I think back now, and I'm like, they saw something. They had enough distance from the issue at hand to have a pretty smart kind of glimpse into what was going to matter most later.
But even at that time, did you fully sense, like I think you do now, that cyberspace and technology warfare is probably the next greatest threat to our national security?
There was no crystallizing moment for me. The big thing was I'd not gone to business school intending to run a nonprofit. That opportunity came my way, and I jumped at it to lead something. And then I wanted to get back on the company building track that I'd gone to business school to do. And again, I wanted to find a way to find the mission. And so cybersecurity was, for me, something that was still very connected to kind of a national security mission, but it was a chance to build a technology business, which was what I wanted to do. I mean, that was the interesting thing to do with that. It still is. I mean, that in our era, if you want to build a big consequential business pretty quickly, it's got to be almost certainly has to be.
But you had to hit the ground running. It was Ukraine. The war was on.
Yeah.
Did you sense the cybersecurity threat there?
Yes. I mean, the urgency. So I've spent about half of the last 2 years I've spent overseas. And by far the place that I've spent the most time is the eastern flank of NATO. Ukraine, Poland, Romania, the Baltics.
In those early days, I mean, could you
Yes.
see the threat? I mean, you had security clearances and whatever. You're close in your region. Was it pretty obvious to you that technology was going to play a large role in this war?
Yes, without a doubt. And I mean, I'll give you some really concrete examples in terms of things that we the United States did to help Ukraine early on. All having to do with tech and all having to do with the private sector. This was the government helping, but it was really the private sector doing. One, we worked with Microsoft to migrate the Ukrainian government enterprise to the cloud in February of 22.
To keep them functioning.
Yeah, so it enabled the Ukrainian government to continue to function, communicate, even as their physical communications infrastructure got destroyed, because all their government data, all their systems were backed up. Second, with the Poles, we provided them with 28,500 Starlink terminals.
And Starlink was a way that you could have instant communications, make telephone calls, and be able to communicate.
Absolutely, and battlefield communications, and they got pretty creative in using the terminals for other things, for their, which created problems later. There are no yellow ribbons on cars for diplomats.
But your main job now is to, if I understand correctly, is to set up the guardrails for international cyberspace and get countries with a lot of different objectives and agendas to agree to fundamental procedures of running cyberspace.
Yes. So foundationally, the position that the United States takes is that the rules that we've developed in the real world need to extend into the digital world. We don't need to build a whole new set of rules.
Now, would this controlling the seas, trade in the seas.
That's right.
International trade
Yeah,
and security.
that's things
We've done
like-
this before.
Yeah, freedom of navigation. There are analogs here. Freedom of navigation, the Geneva Convention, the whole body of human rights law that's developed over time. Just war theory, principles like non-combatant immunity or proportionality. We've got to port these things over into the digital world. We shouldn't be starting with a blank slate, because if we start with a blank slate, we're going to end up with a lot of other influences from places like Russia or China that are going to not agree to building an architecture that looks like what we've developed over the last 70 years in the real world.
Same old problems, same people, same suspects. You can't sell them on the idea, and they're going to fight you all the way on it.
So, it's a fight. I'm going from here to New York to try to put a stick in the spokes of something the Russians are trying to do with the UN. So the United Nations matters in this area, and I'll caveat that a little bit. Over time, a lot of ground game diplomacy by the United States over 20 years has resulted in something called the Framework for Responsible State Behavior in Cyberspace, which every UN member state has agreed to. It's the basic rules of the road governing how we act in the digital world and make sure it doesn't become a free-for-all. Not naive. Obviously our adversaries and competitors don't always play by the rules that they themselves have ostensibly agreed to.
So everybody's on board theoretically.
Everybody is rhetorically on board.
On board,
Now, they don't
okay.
act that way. So then the question is, okay, what do you do to deter the transgressions? And that's where, obviously, it gets interesting.
So what do you think are the greatest transgressions and threats to the United States?
I was in Beijing last week with the secretary, and we spent 5 hours with the Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, and one of the things that we raised was the Chinese are holding American critical infrastructure at risk in a lot of places. There's been public reporting on things like the water system in Guam, some random stuff like the airport in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
But Guam being a key place now in
Well, if you want to flow American forces forward in the Pacific.
the Marines
right,
are moving in there.
exactly.
It's a very strategic place now.
Yes. And interestingly, some of the largest aircraft maintenance facilities in the United States are in Tulsa, so that airport matters too. So there's a method to this madness. So there was a moment in time in 2015 when the U.S. and the Chinese governments basically reached an agreement on this, and there was a decline for a while. I don't think we see that right now.
All right, so that's the Chinese. Now let's go to Russia. They don't seem to be targeting infrastructure, but they're targeting misinformation campaigns.
Yeah.
A completely different agenda.
It is.
So how do you deal with that one?
This one, I think, in many ways is harder. So Russia is a more isolated country right now than China is, but the disinformation campaigns are harder to combat. We're constrained here by domestic politics. We're constrained by some very good things like the First Amendment, and it's very hard to challenge speech in the United States. One thing that I would say, based on where I sit now, is I don't think most people appreciate how much of the inflammatory content they see online is active intelligence operations by our adversaries.
It's a plan.
It is a well-executed, concerted plan that is explicitly designed in order to sow discord and heighten chaos in the United States.
Does that keep you up at night 7 months away from an election?
It does, yeah, indeed. I was meeting with Cyber Command folks here today. So the Department of Homeland Security is generally responsible for defending U.S. critical infrastructure. Cyber Command is responsible for reaching out and touching those who may attack our infrastructure, including election infrastructure. And the State Department's responsible for the diplomatic engagement to call out misbehavior and to try to put the pieces in place to deter it.
What about the just old-fashioned ransom attacks?
Yeah.
Corporation stuff. That seems to be North Koreans are more into that area.
Yeah, it's like robbing banks, right? It's where the money is. So it's a hard. I think we have to shift the incentives. So what we've tried to do there is, and just to be clear on this, ransomware is when a cyber actor can come and lock down the data in an organization generally.
How much leverage does the United States have in taking a leadership role in this area?
It's been encouraging to see that American power and influence still really matter in the world.
It's being questioned in many areas.
It is, and when the U.S. takes a step back,
Is your greatest diplomatic test telling your 2 teenage daughters that you're going to cancel TikTok?
so it's funny. I am the least popular father in their school for that reason. But look, I think that's my opinion. Look, I don't think the U.S. government should be in the business of censoring, media platforms. TikTok, based on what I've seen and read, is a tool of the Chinese Communist Party to collect data on American citizens and to launch influence operations to affect how we think about world events. And this is not a ban. It is a forced divestiture. The goal, TikTok is terrible. It has no value at all. It's awful. But I don't care about that. We can remove the national security concern if it's divested. And that actually is as far as my remit goes. TikTok is banned in China. Facebook is banned in China. YouTube is banned in China.
Nate, thank you so much for sharing your insights on this. We wish you a lot of luck with your family and your teenage daughters, however TikTok is resolved. And we thank you for your incredible service, both in the military and the service you're providing for our country now.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed being here. Thank you.